Before there was Moses parting the Red Sea, before David stood before Goliath, there was a man called to leave everything familiar and follow the voice of a God he could not see. His name, Abraham, the father of faith. But Abraham's story isn't polished, it's raw. This is a man who left his home without a map, trusted promises that took decades to come true, and was willing to put his most precious gift on the altar. But it's also the story of a man who lied twice to save himself while risking his wife's safety. A man who stayed silent when someone under his care, Hagar, was mistreated. A man who prepared to sacrifice his son without even telling Sarah. And yet, God called him friend. Why? Because faith isn't about flawless performance. It's about trusting God enough to take the next step, even when you stumbled. In this episode, we're going to walk the dusty roads of Canaan, sit under the same star-filled skies Abraham once looked up at, and watch the moments of both courage and compromise. We're going to see what his life reveals about waiting on God's timing, obeying without all the details, and finding hope in the fact that God's promises don't depend on our perfection. By the end, you'll see why Abraham's journey is more than ancient history. It's a mirror for anyone learning to follow God when the path ahead is uncertain. The Lord has said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and all the people on earth will be blessed through you." Imagine this. You're settled. You know your land, your neighbors, your routine. Then one day, God tells you to pack up, not for a weekend trip, not for a temporary move, but forever. And he doesn't hand you a map, no address, no timeline, just go. He left the only streets he'd ever walked, the smell of his father's fields, the voices he'd grown up hearing, and he stepped into a silent, broken only by the crunch of gravel under his feet and the sound of God's promises echoing in his mind. That's how Abraham's faith story begins, with obedience in the dark. No sign, no proof, no safety net, just a voice and a promise. This is where many of us get stuck. We want the promise, but we also want the blueprint. Abraham shows us that sometimes God won't give you all the answers up front, because if he did, you'll rely on the plan instead of on him. Faith isn't just believing God exists, it's trusting him enough to take the first step without knowing the next. So ask yourself, how does this speak to your life today? Is there anywhere in your life right now where God is asking you to take the first step, to go, without giving you the full picture? What's stopping you from moving forward? Genesis chapter 15, verse 1 through 6. Abram believed the Lord, and he credited him as righteous. Before Abraham ever proved himself faithful, before he ever passed the test with Isaac, before he even fully understood who God was, God made him a promise. In Genesis chapter 15, Abraham questions God about how this great nation thing will happen since he still has no children. Instead of rebuking him for asking, God takes him outside and says, "Look up at the sky and count the stars. If indeed you can count them, so shall your offspring be." Then something shocking happens. God initiates a covenant, a binding agreement, but it is one-sided. Normally, in the ancient world, both parties will walk through the pieces of a sacrificed animal to seal the deal. But here, God causes Abraham to fall into a deep sleep, and God alone passes through. The covenant in Genesis 15 was sealed while Abraham slept, meaning God was saying, "This is on me, not you." The message, God was saying, "I'm taking the full weight of this promise. Your failures won't void my plan. I will see it through." Then later in Genesis 18, Abraham boldly asks God again and again if he will spare Sodom if 50, 45, 40, 30, 20, or even 10 righteous people are found there. And God listens every time. That shows that God is not intimidated by your questions. He invites them when they come from a place of compassion and a desire to understand his heart. In that same chapter, God appears to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre. Abraham runs to him, bows low, and hurries to prepare a meal. It's such a simple scene. No fire from heaven, no split seas, but it reveals Abraham's deep respect for God's presence. Reverence isn't just in the big moments, it's in how quickly we respond to him in the small ones. Why this matters today. God's promises to you are based on his faithfulness, not your perfection. God welcomes honest questions. They can draw you deeper into his heart. Reverence for God is shown in response time, how quickly you move when he shows up. In Abraham's culture, offering hospitality quickly was a sacred duty. So his running to feed the visitors shows culture honor and spiritual reverence. So ask yourself, do you believe that God's promises in your life depend more on his power than on your performance? Are there questions you've been afraid to ask him? And could they actually lead to a deeper relationship? And when God shows up in your day, how quickly do you respond? Abraham's journey wasn't a straight line of victories. It was a winding path of trust and mistakes, of fear and courage. And in all of it, God's hand never left him. So 1, twice lying about Sarah. Genesis chapter 12, verse 10 through 20, and Genesis chapter 20, verse 1 through 18. Twice in his life, Abraham's fear for his own safety led him to risk Sarah's. When famine pushed them into Egypt, he told Pharaoh that Sarah was his sister. She was taken into Pharaoh's house, a place where she could have been claimed as another man's wife, exposed to the dangers of royal life without protection. Years later, with King Amalek, it happened again. Both times, Sarah's honor and safety were in real jeopardy, and both times God Himself stepped in. With Pharaoh, God struck his household with plagues until Sarah was returned untouched. With Amalek, God came to him in a dream, warning him plainly, "You are good as dead because the woman you have taken, she is a married woman." Amalek protested his innocence, and God confirmed that He was the one who kept Amalek from touching her. Here's the truth. Abraham's fear created danger, but God's faithfulness created protection. Even when Abraham failed to guard the promise, God guarded it Himself. Number 2, the situation with Hagar. Genesis chapter 16, verse 1 through 16. Years passed with no child from Sarah, and impatience took root. Sarah gave her Egyptian servant Hagar to Abraham so she could bear a child for her. Abraham agreed, but when Hagar conceived, tensions exploded. Sarah mistreated her so severely that Hagar fled, a pregnant, vulnerable woman, alone in the darkness. It's here that something remarkable happened. The angel of the Lord, a divine appearance of God Himself, finds Hagar by a spring in the desert. Not only does He speak to her, but He calls her by name. This is the first recorded moment in Scripture where an angel addresses a woman directly, and she's not an Israelite. She's Egyptian, a Gentile, a servant. God tells her to return, but He also gives her a promise. "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." He names her son Ishmael. God hears because He had heard her misery. Maybe you feel like her, running from a situation you didn't choose, carrying a weight you never asked for. If God met Hagar there, He can meet you right where you collapsed. Here's the truth. Abraham and Sarah's impatience created conflict, but God's compassion met Hagar in her exile. He saw her, valued her, and wove blessing into her life of her son. Number 3, the willingness to sacrifice Isaac. Genesis chapter 22, verse 1 through 19. Then comes one of the most heart-wrenching moments in Scripture. God tells Abraham to take his son, the son of promise He waited 25 years for, and offer him as a burnt offering. Abraham doesn't delay. He rises early, takes Isaac, and heads towards the mountain, and he doesn't tell Sarah. Why? Because his loyalty to God came first. He knew that if he told her, she might try to stop him, and he couldn't risk disobeying the voice of the one who gave him Isaac in the first place. This was faith at its rawest, trusting God without knowing the outcome, believing even then that God could raise Isaac from the dead if necessary. And at the very last moment, as the knife is raised, God calls out, "Do not Lay a hand on the boy. A ram is caught in the thicket. Isaac lives. God provides. Here's the truth. Abraham's obedience was unwavering, but God never intended Isaac's death. This test wasn't about losing his son. It was about revealing his faith. And in that moment, God showed himself as Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. So, in every scene, the danger in foreign courts, the tension of a broken household, the test on the mountain, Abraham's humanity is clear, but so is God's unshakable faithfulness. Abraham stumbled, but God's promises never did. So, which of these moments feels most like your season? Needing God to protect what you can't? Needing Him to meet you in the middle of your mess? Needing Him to provide at the very last second? Whichever it is, remember, the God of Abraham is still the God who sees, hears, and provides for you today. Abraham's life covers decades of waiting, wondering, testing, and learning. He's not remembered because he lived flawlessly. He's remembered because he trusted a flawless God. When we look at the sweep of his life, a few truths rise above the rest. 1. God's calling requires movement. Abraham left his homeland without knowing the destination. Faith starts when you move, even if you can't yet see the finish line. 2, God's promises are bigger than your failures. From lying about Sarah to agreeing to Sarah's plan with Hagar, Abraham made real mistakes, but God never tore up the covenant. The promise remained because it was anchored in God's character, not Abraham's perfection. 3, God meets people in the wilderness. Whether it was Abraham under the stars, Hagar by the spring, or Isaac on the mountain, God shows up in lonely, impossible places. Even if you feel isolated or forgotten, you are not beyond His reach. 4, faith grows in the waiting. It took 25 years for the promise of Isaac to come to pass. Every year was a reminder that God's timeline is not ours. But when the promise comes, it's always right on time. 5, obedience opens the door to provision. On Mount Moriah, Abraham obeyed without hesitation, and in that moment of surrender, he discovered God as Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides. Abraham's story is not just about one man. It's the root of a promise that reaches all the way to us. Galatians chapter 3 verse 29 says, if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed and heirs according to the promise. That means the same God who called, carried, corrected, and blessed Abraham is the God who will do the same for you. So, Where is God calling you to move in faith right now? What promise have you given up on because the wait feels too long? And are you willing to believe that God can still fulfill it, even if you made mistakes along the way? The God who called Abraham still keeps his promises, and he hasn't forgotten yours.